This is a Dark Magazine podcast. I'm your host, Nalini Haynes, and this is my co-host, Seeing Eye Dog Silky. We're here at Readings Bookshop in Carlton for Ashley Kalagian Blunt's book launch.
On behalf of Readings and staff, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of the land we're meeting on tonight and pay respect to elders past and present. Well, we've got a bit of a treat tonight. We're launching a book called Dark Mode. Yeah, amazing that. We're in a bookshop and we're launching a book. I know, it's a good start. And to introduce Ashley tonight, we've got another accomplished author, and who, by the name of Lyn Yeowart, and you might have read her book. She's an editor and author of the award-winning psychological thriller The Silent Listener. Now get this, it won the 2022 Indie Book Award for debut fiction. It was a finalist in the People's Book Prize in the UK. It was shortlisted for 3 National Australian Book Awards and longlisted for the 2021 ARA Historical Novel Prize for adult fiction. And there's more. It has been adapted into a feature film. Wow. Over to you, Lyn.
Thank you, Nelson. Okay, so thank you everyone for coming along. It's a Melbourne night. The weather's been relatively predictable, Ash. I don't know whether you know about Melbourne's weather or not, but obviously not, because look what she's wearing. But anyway, we'll just let that slide.
It was 38 in Sydney on Monday. I did not pack for this.
Okay, so thanks everyone. Let me introduce the wonderful Ashley Kalagian Blunt to you. She is the author of Dark Mode. She's got my copy of it there. Hold it up, Ash. It is a psychological thriller which we're launching tonight, so great excitement. And already killing it, pun intended, in Australia. Dark Mode will shortly be knocking the socks off readers in UK and Germany. Is that correct? So that's really astounding. Yes, round of applause. Now, this is Ashley's first novel, but she's written 2 other books. Some of you might have read some of them, one or both of them, hopefully. If you haven't read both of them, go out and buy all 3 later. The first one, How to Be Australian, a moving and I'm going to say slightly unusual memoir. And the second one, chronologically I've got them around the wrong way, but My Name is Revenge. I have to tell you, I love that title. That is so good. Which is a collection of fiction and essays. It was a finalist in the 2018 Carmel Bird Digital Literary Award. Round of applause. Oh, yeah. We need to celebrate these things. As if that's not enough, Ashley's writing appears in the Sydney Morning Herald, Overland, Griffith Review, Sydney Review of Books, Australian Book Review, Kill Your Darlings, and more. Great success. And Ashley, many of us know this, co-hosts with fellow amazing author James Mackenzie Watson the sensational James and Ashley Stay at Home, which is a really fantastic podcast. If you haven't got onto that yet, you're really missing out. So downloadable from any of the normal platforms. Fantastic. It's a podcast about writing, believe it or not, creativity and health. And it's really sensational. And Ashley also teaches creative writing. So she's more than a triple threat. So originally from Canada, she's lived and worked in South Korea, Peru and Mexico, one of my favourite parts of the world, and is really an all-round wonderful, lively, compassionate and interesting person and sensational novelist. So I am really delighted to be here to discuss the thrilling and chilling Dark Mode. So let's get into it. So this is probably the hardest question of all, Ash, but give us your elevator pitch for Dark Mode.
Dark Mode is a psychological thriller with a dark web plot. It is set over a sweltering Sydney summer, not unlike we had Monday and Tuesday this week. It is about a woman named Reagan Carson who runs a small boutique garden center where she grows strange and unusual plants. And in chapter 1, she goes out for a morning run and discovers the body of a woman who has clearly been murdered and who looks very much like Reagan. And she begins to worry that her past is catching up with her.
So she's just answered about 5 of my questions. Anyway, that's all right. We'll just keep going. Now, you've actually written 3 really different books. So what's with that? Are you trying to find yourself or trying to mess with us? I think she's trying to mess with us, but
I'm trying to find the market, Lyn. I'm trying to find what sells. No, my first book, My Name is Revenge, is a collected works, and it explores the historical connections between Australia and the Armenian genocide. And there's actually a lot more historical connections there than you might at first think. And so I spent 10 years trying to get that book out into the world. And I traveled to 3 continents. I interviewed 140 people. I did 2 master's theses, trying to make that book work.
She's an underachiever.
Well, the thing about that book, like in its original incarnation, was that I sent it off to publishers, and it got to the point, like at first it was awful. It was 200,000 words. It was this like crazy mess of a book. But then I did a lot of revisions. I really learned how to write, getting that book down to a crisp 75,000 words, and I got it to that point, and it was being shortlisted for unpublished manuscript awards. But the thing was, publishers were reading it, which was amazing, but then they were saying, look, there's no market for a book about Armenia in Australia. And I was sort of like, okay, all right. So then I ended up, in the incarnation that ended up getting published, there was 2 terrorist attacks here in Australia connected to the denial of the Armenian genocide, which if you're thinking, I don't know very much about the Armenian genocide, that denial is why. It's a big political issue, like globally. So there was an assassination in Sydney at the Turkish Consul General, and his bodyguard were shot down in broad daylight, which is a crime that is still unsolved. And there was a bombing here in Melbourne in South Yarra in 1986 that the bomb luckily went off in the early morning hours. The bomber accidentally set it off early because the intention was to set it off, at 9 a.m. when the consulate there was going to be busy and full of people. But luckily it went off early, and it was only the bomber that died. And interestingly, his co-conspirator was then charged with his murder, and went to prison for that. But then the Australian Supreme Court overturned it. I could talk about that book all night.
We're not
no. I really want to talk about genocide, people. So, genocide book. Then my next book, I thought, okay, well, if publishers aren't interested in a book about Armenia, I'll write a book about Australia, because what else is going to sell in Australia? So I wrote How to Be Australian, which is a memoir of moving from Canada to Australia and thinking that Australia was basically just hot Canada, right? And finding out, no, actually it's not. It's very different. So that was my next memoir. And then I wrote Dark Mode, which is a novel that at its core is about trust and misogyny. And the connection between all 3 of these books really is misseeing others and the narratives that we create from misseeing others. Because when you commit genocide, you are dehumanizing a group of people and creating a narrative about them that convinces, their neighbors that they should actively be involved in their murder. And differently, but still connected to that same concept, is when you move to another country, especially when you're identifiably different. So like for me, with my accent, as soon as I open my mouth, people know I'm not from here. And even though people are very, very welcoming, there's still this thing of like, you don't belong here. Like, we see you as an outsider. And so that, for the first several years I lived here, when I didn't have a job and I didn't know what I was doing, that was a big issue for me. And then obviously with misogyny, it comes back to that same thing of dehumanizing people. Like, misogyny comes from a place of seeing women as lesser beings. So that misseeing and the narratives around it is really the connection between these 3 very different books. But really, I just wanted a book that would sell.
Okay, so that's really good. So why a thriller then? What's inspired you to write a thriller?
Well, you mean besides that they sell? No, I don't want to imply, I would never write a book just because I think it would sell. Otherwise, I would have been writing vampire novels. But I've always been a huge crime and thriller fan. Like, I love this genre so much. Going back to when I read Nancy Drew and the Hardy Boys as a kid. John Grisham was huge when I was a teenager. So, I was reading The Firm and I was reading The Pelican Brief and just getting completely obsessed with, like, legal thrillers. But I think I was never brave enough to try writing a thriller because I felt like, you need to know so much about crime and how crime works and the police. And
that's what Google's for.
Yeah, I felt like I was like, I don't know if I could just Google that though. Like, it just seems like, I think I just had so much respect for the genre. Like, a good crime thriller is, I think, achieving so many things on so many levels. But then, plot twist, I got very sick. I got diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome in 2017, and basically my whole life shut down. So 3 years before everyone else's life shut down, my life shut down in a different way, in that I, a lot of days physically didn't have the strength to sit up in bed. And so I spent 2 years almost entirely bedbound, and I'm still sick today, but I'm definitely recovering. But I filled a lot of that time with true crime podcasts. So I listened to hundreds and hundreds of hours of true crime podcasts. And when I was well enough to follow along with something visual, I would watch true crime documentaries on Netflix. I watched all 431 episodes of Law & Order Special Victims Unit in order. That was my big, when I first got sick, that was my big project. I was like, okay, so my husband was getting them from the library on DVD for me. So that's I think was the turning point in terms of giving me the confidence. After a few years of that, I had so many crime narratives in my head. I was like, I think I can try this. And it was very much an experiment. I was very much like, okay, I'm going to try writing a crime book, and if that doesn't work, I'll go back to nonfiction. I know I can do nonfiction. And I think maybe it worked.
Yeah, I think it worked. So let's talk about Dark Mode. Tell us a little bit about Reagan, the main character. What's going on in her life?
So she has this plant company, this garden center. This flower right in the center of the cover is a voodoo lily. And so it's called Voodoo Lily Garden Center. And that's sort of her cue to people that, this isn't your average garden center. This isn't where you're going to come for, marigolds and daisies and pansies. This is where you're going to come for beehive ginger and black bat plants and, maybe a rat-eating pitcher plant. And so she relates really, really well to plants. But she struggles with people. She finds plants easy because, you give them the right amount of sunlight and water and nutrients and they grow. But people are difficult. People are confusing, and she's had some bad experiences with a number of people. And that's just taught her that she can't really trust people. And so because of that, also because of some things that happened when she was younger, she is very wary of the internet. And so she has no internet presence other than just one static web page for her business, and people can email her through that web page to the business, and that's it. And all her friends, all the people in her life are like, why aren't you on Instagram? Why can't we text you photos? She's got an old cell phone where, if you want to do a text message, each key was 3 letters. You're remember those days? So it's 2017. The book's set in 2017, and she's still got one of those cell phones. And partly this is based on my husband, who 2017 was the year he upgraded from one of those cell phones to a smartphone. It was a real turning point, I think, technology-wise. That was the year we all got hyper online. So she's being pushed by her bank to use their banking app. She's being pushed by people in her life to get her business on Instagram. And she's very nervous about this for good reason, but forces in her life are going to start pushing her onto the internet.
So that 2017, why specifically did you set it in 2017?
A few reasons. One was I did feel like that was the last year that really you could, not have a smartphone, be a younger person with a business and not have a smartphone. Also, it was, we're going to talk about the Black Dahlia murder. Yep. So that is a true story. A woman named Elizabeth Short was murdered, and her body was found on January 15th, 1947. So setting it in 2017, it opens on January 15th, set 70 years to the day after this murder, and there's a there's a very specific reason for that. And then also, because it's a book that deals with misogyny, I felt January 2017 was a great time to have in the background this Trump coming into power, because there are some references to him that sort of tie those attitudes in with what's happening in the story.
That's cool. I like that. So yeah, okay, you mentioned Black Dahlia. You better tell us about Black Dahlia. I hope everyone's got a strong stomach.
I won't get too graphic, but so Elizabeth Short was a woman. She was from America's Midwest. She had moved to California because she wanted to become an actress, and also she wanted to be a mom. She wanted to get married. She was quite young, early 20s. Unfortunately, she crossed paths with the wrong person, and her murder is still technically unsolved to this day. But she was found in the morning in this suburban neighborhood. She had been left, and her body had been specifically posed, which is, I know in movies and TV, we see that all the time, but in real life, it's actually very, very rare that a killer specifically poses a body. It's about 1% of murders. And she was bisected at the waist and left in a very particular position. And also there were marks made on her body. There were specific things done to her body. Like, for example, there was a cross hatch cut into her thigh. And this had all been done after death. So this wasn't about torturing this woman while she was alive. This was about the scene that was made when her body was left out in public. And the reason I chose this murder, and I wanted to engage with it in the book, is because there's one theory that's been put forward by a LA homicide detective who, he's written a number of books, believes he's solved this case. He was told by someone that after he retired from a very successful career with the LA police, he was told by someone, oh, hey, your dad was a suspect in the Black Dahlia murder. And he'd been about 8 when the murder happened, so he did not know that. And his dad at that time was deceased, and he was sort of like, that's strange. And so decided he would investigate it and see if he could, definitively prove, obviously, his dad hadn't done it. And when he got into his investigation, he came to the opposite conclusion. And he's convinced that his dad did it. And he's convinced that the reason his dad did this is because his dad was a very successful surgeon, but also a failed artist. And his dad was friends with people like Man Ray, the surrealist photographer and painter. And basically, being on the fringe of this surrealist art movement, this detective believes that his father killed this woman, just picked a random woman, and killed her and left her body out in public with these marks on her to show that he was willing to take greater risks in art than any of these so-called artists. And the marks on her body, you can link them, and that's what this detective has done, to famous paintings from Man Ray, from Salvador Dali, like the crosshatch on her thigh. Man Ray has a piece of art that's a topless woman, and her, instead of a face, she has a crosshatch. So I thought this was a really, really interesting perspective on the extremes of misogyny, because this is a case where, if this theory is correct about why he committed this murder, and to me, I've read a lot about this case, and it's the most compelling argument I've seen, it means that this woman was murdered as an art project, and it's an example of how men see women's bodies as being for their own ends. So that's what I wanted to engage with, and that's why I included the Black Dahlia.
I was going to impress the audience with some of those details you just told us. sorry, Lyn. I think I just screwed this up. So it is absolutely fascinating, and I'm just going to say I actually know someone whose name is Elizabeth Short.
Wow.
Yeah, it's really bizarre, and yeah, the whole thing about George Hodel, the detective, is really fascinating. Go Googling. But only after you've bought Ashley's book and read the book, though, then it'll all make sense. So I'm just looking. Do you want to have a read something really amazing and compelling to us before we do the next few questions? That won't be hard. You can open it at any page.
Build it up to too much. Okay, so we know that in the first scene, Reagan finds the body, and I'm going to just skip ahead a little bit. So first of all, right after that scene, she finds the body, and then instead of calling the police, she runs. And I wanted to flip that crime trope on its head because so often in like when I was watching those 430 episodes of Law and Order, random people find a body and then jump cut to the police are there. So it's almost always like people find a body, they call the police. And I wanted her to have a compelling reason for why she doesn't call the police, but she does not share that with you right away. So right after we see that scene where she bolts and she tries to call, she really wants to call, but she really can't. So then we see this message. That's taken from the internet, and all it says is, it's dated 15 January 2017. After years of planning, the day has finally arrived. By now you've seen the news. I could tell you about it in electrifying detail, but I know we share the preference for the visual. More to come. And then there's 3 JPEG files. And then after that we jump 2 days, and Tuesday, 17 January, Reagan stepped blearily into the dull light of her apartment corridor, rummaging in her bag for her keys. She'd fumbled through Sunday, making it to the garden center minutes before opening, struggling to focus, the woman's body tumbling through her thoughts. She jumped at the ringing phone, the door chime, sucking in knife-sharp breaths. What were the odds? How many women were petite with hard cheekbones and big dark curls? Probably lots. But that woman looked almost identical to her. It was like seeing her own dead body. By Monday, she'd talked herself down. The dead woman had nothing to do with her. They happened to look alike, that was all. She was running late and the keys had lodged at the bottom of her bag. She yanked them free, turning to lock the door, and choked. A white lace negligee lay on the stained olive carpet. Reagan threw herself back into the apartment, slamming the door and flipping the 3 deadbolts. He's back. She checked the peephole, hoping she'd imagined it. She hadn't. The single piece of lingerie was in the corridor, rumpled but unmistakable, its 2 thin shoulder straps splayed above the bra. An oversized bow hung between the cups, as if women should be gift-wrapped. Was he waiting in the hallway? The peephole didn't let her see more than a few meters beyond her door. Shit. She pressed her ear to the heavy wood, but she couldn't hear over her own rapid breath. She kept one eye against the peephole while fumbling her tiny mobile from her handbag, glancing down just long enough to find Min's name and bash the call button. You've reached Minley Chase. Leave a message. Min, her voice high-pitched, the fear piercing. He's back, he's back, he's back. Call me. She stood against the door, squeezing her mobile, unable to move. Down the hall, a door slammed shut. Reagan braced. No one appeared. Minutes ticked past, Reagan barely moving. She pressed redial, got voicemail. He could be waiting outside the apartment, pressed against the pockmarked eggshell paint just out of sight. Or he could be around the corner, on the stairs. If he'd claimed to be checking the gas meters or dropping off a package, any neighbor would have buzzed him in. No one was cautious enough. No one was afraid.
Okay, and it just goes on from there. I don't think there's a second where you can kind of relax in this book, so...
Well, there's 1 second.
Oh, maybe. Oh, when you get to the end.
No, not the end.
No, not after the... Oh, I don't know. We'll argue about that later. But it is called Dark Mode. It is dark, isn't it? And it's also, I think, action-packed, which sometimes thrillers aren't. So I think you've really done that very masterfully. So, talking about things that are dark, the other big part of it is the dark web. So can you fill us in a little bit on the dark web and how you've used it in the book?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, the dark web was really interesting to research. And one of the best Zoom events, no, I should clarify that. The best Zoom event I've ever been on was a tour of the dark web by a dark web journalist who just took us on Zoom, opened up the dark web, toured us around. I was like, I could sit on Zoom all day and do this. The dark web's really, really fascinating. It was created by the US Navy about 20 years ago. And one of the reasons they created it was because they wanted a way to share highly confidential information. But they realized if they had a place where only they were sharing highly confidential information, it's like putting a needle in an empty room. If you can break into the room, well, the only thing in there is a needle. But if they let other people put their information on the dark web, then all of a sudden you've got a needle in a haystack, and now your information is much more secure. So that's why the dark web exists. And of course, it's a place that attracts a lot of criminal activity. We know that. It's also, though, used by, for example, activists in countries where the internet is censored, so that they can access, each other. They can access information from outside that's normally blocked. So, for example, BBC has a mirror site on the dark web, and you can even access Facebook through the dark web if you want to use it with more privacy. Your trade-off with the dark web is that it's very private, it's encrypted, but because of that, it's very, very slow. So it's sort of like going back in time to the 1990s where, there's no graphics. It's like black screen with white font, and everything is like loading one line at a time.
Do you have to key in commands like we
No.
used to with like DOS?
No, it's not like that. So it's not quite
Showing
that.
my age here.
I remember that. It's not quite that bad, but you do generally have to know the URL of where you're going to, because most of the dark websites aren't indexed, so you can't search them. And what I found when I started using the dark web is if you go to the dark web and you're trying to search, the sites that are indexed are generally ones where you're like, I don't trust this site. So for example, there was one site I went to where one of the things you could add to cart was $1,700 to destroy someone's life. Oh. Except that I was pretty certain, like looking around at this site, I was pretty certain, I'm like, yeah, you could pay $1,700 in Bitcoin and just get absolutely nothing is what was going to happen if you paid that. But I got interested in the dark web because I lost my driver's license a block from my house. I'd just gone to get a package and, had it in my pocket and it fell out. And someone obviously found it. And instead of taking it, looking at it and saying like, oh, I could just put this in this person's mailbox, they put it on the dark web. And I know that because the next morning I went into the back end of my author website and there were just a flood of visits from China, Russia, and Ukraine, and all these places where there's basically like coalitions of hackers who one of the things that they do is they're sort of information brokers. They put your personal details on the dark web and they'll sell them. And the more complete those details are, the more they're worth. And a full set of your complete information would probably go for about $20. So in case you're wondering what you're worth, that's the max. But an incomplete set, like the information for my driver's license is quite incomplete because it doesn't have my phone number, it doesn't have my email, things like that. So they would have been looking for that kind of information to make that set of information more complete and thus more valuable.
And so how did you use this in your novel, Ash?
The dark web. So basically, that quote or that excerpt I read out, that message that's from the internet is we find out that that's taking place on the dark web, and we find out that there's people who are involved with this murder are communicating on the dark web. So that's how I've drawn it in.
Terrific. You said the dark web has some, let's say, good things as well as bad things, which is sort of life and the book. So let's maybe move away from those really dark, horrible things and tell us a little bit about your research for plants that are really amazing.
I loved researching plants. It's so funny because my mom works for a gardening company and I grew up sort of, in the summers we'd go to the nurseries and I would help her count all the seed packets that were being returned for the year. And my mom's a great gardener, but she grows things like pansies and marigolds and like cheery, happy, sweet flowers. And I am not a gardener, and I never really found plants that interesting. And then I came across a fact, and I can't remember where I came across this, but I came across this research that had been done by these scientists who had discovered that grass cut with a power mower screams. And they measured this because they can measure, like, it's giving off a hertz level. It's way, way outside of the range of human hearing. And then other scientists independently discovered that all plants scream. They scream when they're dehydrated and in need of water. And that's one of the reasons I set the book over this sweltering summer, is because Reagan knows these facts about plants. And so she's in the city, and the plants are all dehydrated because there's been no rain for ages, and it's so hot. And so she cannot hear the plant screaming, but she thinks she can feel it. And I just thought I can use facts about plants that she would know and incorporate that into the tone and atmosphere of the book. So another plant that I did quite a bit of research on that I found absolutely fascinating, but is very dark, is the rat-eating pitcher plant. That is a real plant. It's a pitcher plant, a type of pitcher plant that fills with its own acid, and it lives off mice and frogs that climb in because it secretes this sweet syrup to entice them up to the rim of the cup, and then they slide inside, and then they can't get back out because there's barbs in there that are pointed down that prevent them from getting out. And then, thankfully, it turns out that they drown in the acid before they are dissolved.
Oh, that's a relief.
They don't dissolve alive. Yes. Yeah, so I did a lot of research into the strange dark side of plants. And plants are so much darker. So strangler figs, which probably everybody here has seen a strangler fig on a bushwalk. You don't think about a strangler fig, but it's right there in the name. Like, when you see a strangler fig, you're watching a slow motion murder. Like, it's going to take 80 years, but it's going to kill the plant that it's slowly crushing.
Oh God, I don't know where to go from there. Trust me, this is an amazing book that we've just really touched on just a few things. So, cut through all the questions you've already answered. Is everything in dark mode wrapped up nice and neatly? And why did you decide to end it the way that you did? Without no spoilers, of course.
Well, Josh Pomeroy was supposed to be here tonight, and I'm really glad that Lyn is here. This is actually fantastic. Josh called me last week. He's like, Ashley, I realized I'm supposed to be in Tasmania. I was like, of course you did. So, but I do have a real respect. If you've read Josh Pomeroy's books, he always ends, his endings are often really, there's just one final sort of twist of the screw, and I really loved that. So I was trying to live up to that with my ending.
Yeah, very nice. And someone else did that now, I can't remember who it was. But, yeah. And one final question, then I might throw it open because we've got lots of people here. I'm sure they're dying to know a bit more. Tell us, if you're a plotter or a pantser, tell us what that means for people who perhaps don't know, and then tell us how you work.
Okay, so plotting is when you plan out your whole novel in advance, and pantsing is the flying by the seat of your pants approach to writing a novel. I think it's a spectrum. I don't think it's so as binary as it's sometimes presented. And so I think this book, there's a particular twist that comes about 2/3 of the way through, and I started from that because I had this idea, and I thought, I've watched a lot of crime shows and read a lot of crime books, and I thought, never seen that particular thing done before, and I wonder if I could build out a book from that. So that's what I did. I built it out from that moment. I thought, like, what would I need to have to make that happen? And so the second half of it all came together pretty well. The first half I had to rewrite entirely 3 times to make it work, so that all the pieces came into place to make the second half happen.
So you didn't really plan? Is that what you're saying? Plot?
I think I had some broad strokes.
Yeah.
Had some broad strokes, and then I sort of pantsed in between.
Yeah. That's great. What's next for you?
More psychological
Yeah, I was
thrillers?
going to say, are you writing psychological thrillers again?
Yes. No, I found
Okay.
the thing. I
Right.
found the thing.
No more memoirs?
Well, I mean, unless something drastic happens, I mean, I would like to.
It's like you get sucked into one of those picture plans or something.
Yeah, that would make a good memoir. Yes. No, I would like to continue writing psychological thrillers. I'm like hoping, one day I'll have a big shelf with like just 20 psychological thrillers with my name on them. So
That sounds fantastic. We will all be looking forward to that. Okay, so I'm going to throw it open to the audience. If you've got any questions you'd like to ask Ash.
I can actually take a mic.
Oh, yeah.
Do that.
Hi Ashley, we have a couple of things in common, and we sort of had this little chat, and I'm curious if you might speak about it. I also live with chronic illness, and I find crime incredibly cathartic. Did you find writing the book cathartic? And I'm just sort of curious about this connection, if you've had any thoughts about it.
Oh, thank you for that question, Michelle. And I know there's a number of people in the audience here who live with chronic illness. So, and thank you to those of you who are standing. I really appreciate it. So I found listening to true crime, I found true crime, the one thing that really, when I was really sick, it was the one thing that lifted me out of that and took me into whole different world. Like I couldn't listen to writing podcasts, for example, because I was so sad that I wasn't able to write. And there were so many things like that. But true crime, like if I was listening to someone getting murdered, all of a sudden I was like, oh, okay, like what's happening here? So, which sounds kind of terrible.
Steve was having a ball.
My dear husband Steve has banned me from talking about murders at home, which is just drives me crazy. So in the book, Reagan doesn't want to hear anything about murders, and that's based on my lovely husband. Whereas her best friend is a true crime fanatic and a true crime author. So her best friend is a little more based on me. But yeah, so I found listening to true crime or reading about it or documentaries, I found that very cathartic. The book definitely was a big escape. It was a big escape from COVID, and I loved writing it. It wasn't quite as cathartic in the same way because there was this, it's a little bit different when it's your own work, and there's this sort of like, oh, am I going to spend 2 years writing a book that I put in a drawer again? Or, is this maybe going to get published? But it definitely, I did have a lot of joy in working on Dark Mode and getting to engage with the true crime elements. I've woven so many true crime elements into this book because I just love it so much.
I have to stop.
Questions?
Well, one more, I think we've got time for. Sorry.
Okay.
I didn't think she was going to be quite this
Verbose.
loquacious.
Loquacious, that's a great word. Anybody else?
Question?
No?
All right.
Anything else you'd like to tell us, Ash, that you think is really vital that's going to make people go and buy? That's the only reason we're here.
Well, it means so much to me to be here and be doing this. Like when I spent those years in bed and not knowing if I was going to get better and not knowing if I was going to be able to engage in the world again. Like it's really, really meaningful to be here. My last book came out during a COVID lockdown, June 2020, so I wasn't able to do this kind of thing. So I love connecting with readers. It's so meaningful, and this is the most joyful part of it. So thank you so much for being here. And books are really sold by people by word of mouth. So if you have a friend who likes crime fiction and you want to tell them about it, that would mean the world to me. So thank you.
Okay. Okay, so I think that's it, except for the most important part of the night, which is that you're going to make your way to a bookseller and buy a copy of Dark Mode, and Ash will be very generously signing copies just near where the cameraman is. Please make sure you buy a copy, read it. Word of mouth, as Ash said, we all rely on people buying books and supporting the writing community. Many thanks to Readings, who always support writers so well with so much support. Thank you. And once again, thank you to all of you for coming out. And as I said, last thing you need to do before you leave is go and buy the book, and get Ash to sign it.
And one final thank you is that I have something for you. And now this has been, I didn't realize this was going to be so in demand, Lyn. I have been asked so many times by people in the last few days if they could get this exact thing. So I hope you like it.
Can I open it out?
Open it. Yeah.
It's not that picture plant.
It is. No.
I must confess, I did go through a period of my life where I had carnivorous plants, including little pitcher plants and honeydew ones that take little insects, and of course Venus flytraps.
Yeah, Venus flytraps. Yeah. I had some.
Oh, I know what this is. Oh, fantastic. Hang on, brilliant. Thank you.
Hope you pull it out.
Oh, yes, yep.
Lyn's been seeing this on social media. I wish I had known how popular they were going to be. We got asked by so many booksellers if they could get a t-shirt. So Lyn, you're one of the very few people in the world with a Dark Mode t-shirt.
Could you thank Lyn and Ashley tonight?
This has been a Dark Magazine podcast. I'm your host, Lyn Haynes, and this is my co-host, Seeing Eye Dog Silky. We've been here at Readings Bookshop in Carlton for Ashley Kalagian Blunt's launch. Stay safe and have fun.